first item of business this afternoon is portfolio questions, and in order to get as many people in as possible, I prefer short and succinct questions and answers to match. Please. Question 1 from John Finney.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government what steps it will take to ensure that environmental legislation and guidelines do not have a disproportionate negative impact on the species Homo sapiens.
Minister Paul Wheelhouse.
The principal purpose of our environmental regulations and supporting guidance is to protect the environment, given its importance to supporting the quality of life and well-being of both current and future generations. As such, the impact of regulations on both individuals and communities is an important driver of many of these regulations and is an essential criteria considered in both the development of policy and its implementation. Independence will give Scotland the opportunity to strengthen commitments on environmental protection even further by enshrining this principle in the proposed written constitution, further underscoring the importance of safeguarding our natural heritage for future generations.
John Finney.
I thank the Minister for that response. Response 411 to SNH consultation on core areas of wild land was provided by the Banaw Common Grazings Committee, and if I quote, "These days crofters view with great suspicion anything emanating from SNH, however innocent it may seem at first glance. This is especially true for something that could be used in future to impose a further layer of bureaucracy and restriction to land use. Further designations will erode the influence and local control which is essential if crofting communities are to thrive in the future." The people of the Highlands and Islands appreciate the precious environment and appreciate jobs and houses. What specific steps can the Minister take to ensure that needed jobs and housing isn't subsumed by what may be seen as externally imposed restrictions on land use?
Well, the first thing to say is, not showing any disrespect to those who've written the comments that Mr Finney read out, we're not proposing a designation of wild land, and in fact, insofar as wild land is a factor in terms of the National Planning Framework 3 and Scottish planning policy, it's really in relation to wind farm development. So we are very mindful of the need to ensure there's the ability to develop local economies in regions such as the Highlands and Islands, and that we don't want to be prescriptive against developments needed for sustainable development principles to be applied in those areas. As regards what else we are doing, I think it's something I'd be happy to write to the member about, but we do believe that we have in place a strong support and emphasised in the Regulatory Reform Bill for the principles of sustainable economic growth, but with due regard to environment, and that's the approach we take in respect to many sectors of the economy.
Many thanks. Question 2, Mary Scanlon.
Thank you. To ask the Scottish Government what progress it has made on implementing the recommendations of the Scottish Dairy Review Ambition 2025.
Secretary Richard Lockhead.
The recommendations made in the Scottish Dairy Review, known as Ambition 2025, aims to transform our dairy sector, and I have already implemented 2 of the recommendations. Firstly, I am delighted that Paul Grant, the driving force behind the internationally successful jam and marmalade manufacturer Mackay's, has agreed to chair the Dairy Growth Board, which will oversee Ambition 2025. I have also provided start-up funding for the Dairy Hub, which will act as a one-stop shop for information, advice and training for Scottish dairy farmers.
Ms Scanlon.
Thank you very much. I welcome that response. Given that several supermarkets are now selling 4 pints of fresh milk for £1 as a loss leader, can the Cabinet Secretary give us a reassurance that the price received by farmers will not be affected? And can he also tell us what he's doing to focus on non-liquid dairy products? And finally, what will he do to help promote the nutritional and health benefits of milk?
Any questions there, Cabinet Secretary?
Thank you. In terms of the first question, clearly it's up to the retailers how much they wish to charge the consumers for the milk, but I think we all agree in this chamber that any reduction in cost should not simply be passed on to the primary producer. And as long as the primary producer receives a fair return for their milk, then it's up to the commercial criteria the supermarkets want to use for what they charge the consumer. Thankfully, the price for milk has been steadily increasing over the last year or so, so hopefully that is continuing to deliver good news for primary producers. And of course, the Dairy Review will add further value, hopefully, to the primary product in the years ahead. In terms of non-liquid milk products, clearly the Dairy Review was very much focused on adding value to the primary product, and that's why there's a heavy emphasis on exploiting the export opportunities, where with the rising middle classes around the world, we can add value to the product here and sell it to overseas markets, and for once try and make the most of that, because we've neglected that in past decades in the dairy sector. And thirdly, in terms of the nutritional benefits of milk, I very much want to put on record that milk is very nutritious, and we will always look for opportunities to highlight that to the consumer. And I'm sure members likewise will want to encourage people to support our dairy sector by consuming in a moderate way dairy products and, of course, healthy raw milk.
Many thanks. Question 3 in the name of Dennis Robertson has been withdrawn for understandable reasons. Question 4, Claudia Beamish.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government what the implications for the marine environment and marine industries are of the delay of the National Marine Plan.
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, as the Chamber may be aware, we received thousands of responses to the consultations on the National Marine Plan, also the marine protected areas and marine renewables. And of course that illustrates the importance of all the issues involved. We're now in the process of considering all these responses and the important issues that have been raised at the consultation events right around Scotland. So we're aiming to develop a National Marine Plan which best achieves the balance of protecting and enhancing our marine environment alongside our growing, existing and emerging marine industries. So what matters here really is getting the outcomes right for Scotland's seas, and we've always said that the timetable would need to reflect the need for proper consultation and engagement.
Beamish.
Particularly about the balance between the industries and the marine environment. However, there are a range of stakeholders, as I understand it, who have expressed concern about the shortage of clear policy and guidance in the draft plan to resolve conflict between these many users of the sea. And can the Cabinet Secretary tell us what mechanisms the Scottish Government will use to address conflicts between the marine sectors and ensure sustainable development?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, as Claudia Beamish quite rightly highlights, one of the crux issues of the whole consultation is how we do address that balance between different competing sectors and resolve potential conflicts. So that's why we have to take a bit of time to listen carefully to the representations we've received through the consultation, just as referred to by Claudia Beamish, and that's why we need a bit more time. We always said that the summer timescale for publishing the Marine Plan would be subject to change depending on the consultation, and as indicated by Claudia Beamish's question, there have been lots of representations. So we have to get that right, because conflict resolution will be at the heart of the way forward with all these competing industries. So we just need to make sure we listen carefully to people's views on that.
Jamie McGregor.
Thank you. Does the Cabinet Secretary agree with me that a comprehensive approach towards the fish farming sector must be adopted, both to ensure that the industry is well equipped for the future, whilst ensuring strict environmental protection and protection for wild migratory sea trout and salmon? And does the Minister believe that this is achieved within the National Marine Plan?
Cabinet Secretary.
Okay. Well, firstly, clearly under the Ministerial Working Group, there's various streams of activity and working groups below that, looking at individual issues facing the future of aquaculture. So we want to have that comprehensive approach to making the most of the opportunities and global opportunities for farmed salmon and other aquaculture products. In terms of the Marine Plan, again, the purpose of the Marine Plan is to plan properly for Scotland's seas, just like we do on land, and aquaculture plays a central role within that. And again, there will be competition for space, perhaps potentially in some parts of Scotland, and that's why we have to get the decision-making framework right and have a way of resolving potential conflicts. So very much we've got the interest of the aquaculture at heart in moving forward with the National Marine Plan.
Thanks. Question 5, Joan McAlpine.
Thank you. To ask the Scottish Government what benefits independence could bring to the forestry industry.
Minister Paul Wheelhouse.
The member will know that this Scottish Government has always sought to put the best interests of the forest industry at the very forefront of our decisions, and is committed to planting a further 100,000 hectares of new woodland over the period 2012 to 2022. Our commitment is demonstrated by the fact that woodland expansion in Scotland in 2011-12 was nearly 3 times as much as the rest of the UK. As highlighted in the White Paper, with independence, the Scottish Government will, in the next CAP negotiation, seek to correct the failings of the UK Government and negotiate an uplift in Pillar 2 funding for the Scottish Rural Development Programme from our current position, where the UK has negotiated Scotland to the bottom of the EU league table for such funding. If we had a similar Pillar 2 budget to Ireland, for example, we could have a budget more than 4 times the size of our current allocation, opening the possibility to increase support for each area funded by SRDP, including forestry.
I thank the Minister for that answer. Over the last decade, the forestry industry has become more centralised. The Minister is aware of the Scottish Woodlot Association in our South of Scotland region, who believe that decentralised local tenure brings resilience to the industry, encourages more young people to get involved and connects the industry to local people. Can the Minister outline how we could encourage more initiatives such as Scottish Woodlots and bring about a more decentralised forestry industry?
Minister.
I thank the member for a question. I mean, over the last decade, the forestry industry has become more centralised. I do accept that to a degree. In my closing address during the parliamentary debate on woodlots in November last year, I welcomed this pioneering initiative the Woodlot Association have created, and that aims to create a greater connection, I think, between people and Scotland's land and forests. And a key element of that is encouraging wider forms of management and ownership in ensuring that a range of opportunities exist, such as in the National Forest Land Scheme, which offers an opportunity to promote it at woodland crofts and hutting. I hope Joan McAlpine will be pleased to hear the Scottish Government is providing financial support to help the Woodlots initiative establish a network of demonstration sites across the country, and is also working to establish a hutting pilot on the National Forest Estate. And I'd be pleased to write to the member with further details of this work, given the time constraints.
Thank you. Alex Ferguson.
Thank you. Isn't it wonderful that devolution allows the Scottish Government to deliver what the Minister has just pointed out? But I have to say the main concern of the people in the forestry sector that I speak to is not a question of independence or otherwise. It's the lack of the planting of commercial timber crop that's required to keep the sector active in the future. So will the Minister consider reviewing the percentage of commercial trees that have to be planted as part of any planting scheme?
Minister.
Well, I certainly recognise the point that many stakeholders in the forestry sector have made about the need to promote more productive forestry planting, and that's why we have indicated that we'll be looking in the next SRDP to try and promote a situation where we have approximately 60-40 split in favour of productive planting. So that is something we identify, something we're going to work hard to address in terms of obviously the consultation. SRDP has been looking at the actual intervention rates in terms of funding for planting projects. But I would just point out in reference to the opening remarks Mr Ferguson made that obviously Pillar 2 is absolutely crucial to our aspirations in forestry. And while I know we may have differences about constitutional feature, I hope we both agree that if we had more Pillar 2 funding, we could do a lot more with forestry. We have a different view perhaps as how we achieve that, but I believe independence is the route to get a fairer allocation for Scotland.
Many thanks. Cara Hilton.
The Forestry Commission throughout the UK benefits from cross-border cooperation, and their fears that our separation will impact on that work, particularly in Sylvan House in Edinburgh. Can I therefore ask the Cabinet Secretary what representation he has had with the UK Government regarding research carried out by the Commission, and if that would continue to the same extent if Scotland votes for separation in September?
Mr.
Well, clearly, I have huge respect for forest research and the work of the Commission in relation to the number of disease threats that Scotland faces and the ongoing work they're doing. Very important work on developing the knowledge that the Forestry Commission has of ecosystem services as a concept, and the important work we do with our National Forest Estate. We have a very good relationship with forest research. Yes, it is. It's funded currently by DEFRA. That's a reserve budget. We look very closely at what we do in future. If Scotland gains its independence, we will, as we hope it will, we will work very closely across these islands to ensure we have research collaboration, and we would obviously have discussions with the UK Government about how we facilitate that. But those working in forest research have nothing to fear from independence.
Thank you. Question 6, Christina McKelvey.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government what actions it has taken to help householders living near rivers from flooding.
Minister Paul Wheelhouse.
Flood risk management is a high priority for the Scottish Government, and we work closely with SEPA and other resilience partners to prepare communities affected by flood risk. In the current spending review period, with the agreement of the Convention of Scottish Local Authorities, we have specifically identified £42 million per year within the capital settlement for flood protection projects, which cost in excess of £2 million. And in the 8 years from 2007-08 to 2014-15, we will have provided £326.4 million worth of capital funding for flood protection, which is more than 7 times as much as was paid out under the old flood prevention grant scheme in the 8 years up to 2006-07. We have also invested significantly in improving Scotland's flood warning service, including funding to enable SEPA and the Met Office to establish a Scottish flood forecasting service, which is resulting in better flood forecasting and warning information being made available to the public throughout Scotland. We're also supporting the public and others to take practical actions through additional funding for the Scottish Flood Forum.
Okay, Christina McKelvey.
Can I thank the Minister for that answer? As the Minister knows, because I have already brought it to his attention, the plight of the Hamilton family in Rosebank village in my constituency, who faced a very unusual circumstance on the 30th of December when the River Clyde burst its banks and flowed back the way and flooded the house. Can the Minister suggest a course of action, like requesting that SEPA do a full investigation into the reasons why the Clyde flooded in the manner that it did, the very unusual manner that it did?
Minister.
Well, certainly I have seen the evidence that Christine McKelvey has presented to me, and it certainly will commend the family concerned, the Hamilton family, for taking all the necessary steps they can to do what they can to protect their property. But clearly, I know there are specific circumstances in terms of location of the property in close proximity to the river that may need further investigation. So I'm happy to ask SEPA officials to have a site visit and to have a look at the particular situation to see if there's any advice they can give to the member and to the family, importantly, as to how they may be able to better protect their property in the future.
Many thanks. Question 7, Anne McTaggart.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government what action it has taken to tackle air pollution in Glasgow.
Minister. Paul Wheelhouse.
Glasgow City Council has produced an air quality action plan containing a comprehensive range of measures to improve air quality in the city. The Scottish Government is working closely with the Council as it implements the measures contained in the plan and is providing practical and financial assistance where appropriate. In the current financial year, the Council has received £165,000 of funding from the Scottish Government to support action on air quality. The Council's other partners, including Transport Scotland and SEPA, are also working closely with the Council. And examples of measures being implemented include a commitment to introduce and enforce low-emission zones at the Commonwealth Games venues in 2014, grant funding for the introduction of all-electric vehicles and bus quality partnerships, monitoring local air quality management and enforcement of vehicle emission regulations, provision and collation of advice and information through the Scottish Air Quality website, Scotland's Environment Web and the Scottish Transport Emissions Partnership. And in addition, the Scottish Government is taking forward various national measures to improve air quality as outlined in the Air Quality Strategy for England, Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland. And these measures are intended to reduce air pollution in towns and cities throughout Scotland.
Thank you. Anne McTaggart.
I thank the Minister for that very detailed response and for answering the question. Given that every year in Scotland as many as 3,000 people die prematurely from air pollution and that the worst levels of the pollution have actually been recorded in Hope Street, Glasgow, I think the Minister has clearly indicated what action the Government has taken. Thank you.
Thank you. So I take it there's no question there then. Many thanks then. Question 8, Liz Smith.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government what discussions it has had with local authorities following the recent incidents of flooding.
Paul Wheelhouse.
I met representatives of Dumfries and Galloway Council when I visited Dumfries during the flooding on 30th of December 2013. I then hosted a local authority summit on 15th of January to look at the work currently underway to produce the first ever round of flood risk management plans. The summit was attended by 28 of Scotland's 32 local authorities. My officials have also been in touch with a number of local authorities in relation to operation of the Bellwyn scheme in relation to the recent flooding. The Cabinet Secretary for Finance, Employment and Sustainable Growth triggered the Bellwyn scheme on the 31st of December, and as a result, Scottish Borders, Orkney Islands and South Lanarkshire councils have notified the Scottish Government of possible claims for additional revenue funding under the scheme. In addition, Dumfries and Galloway Council is seeking additional financial support out with the Bellwyn scheme, and that request is currently being considered. I also met with representatives of West Dunbartonshire Council last week, and will meet with Argyll and Bute Council later today to discuss their funding needs.
Liz Smith.
Thank you, Minister, for a very comprehensive answer. Minister, you know that in England, 2 councils have temporarily suspended the council tax for those families that have been very badly affected by flooding. And he will know that he made a commitment in this chamber last week to say that lessons will be learned from what's happening down south. Could I ask whether the Scottish Government would consider in the future, for those families that are very badly affected, a suspension of council tax?
Minister.
Thank you. Well, I believe from correspondence with another member that we've had a look at this issue, and that while local authorities do have the responsibility of collecting council tax, there's scope for local authorities to take a decision as to what particular local exemptions or changes in collection policy they wish to put forward. But I'm happy to get detail of that and to write to Ms Smith in relation to it's a matter partly out with my portfolio, as I'm sure she appreciates, and get her a response on that basis.
Dr Lane Murray.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I wonder, following the answer from the Minister there, if he can advise of the likely timescale for a decision to be made on the request by Dumfries and Galloway Council for funding for flood prevention measures.
Minister.
I don't have a timescale to report to the member, but I'm happy to write back to the member just to update her on what I understand to be the situation. It will involve not just myself but other ministers, so I'll happily write to Dr Murray on that basis.
Question 9 not lodged in the name of Jim Hume. Question 10, Marco Biaggi, briefly.
To ask the Scottish Government how it supports local authorities with a high proportion of tenement housing to improve recycling in those areas.
Zero Waste Scotland provides a range of support to local authorities and businesses to help them improve recycling services and drive down waste, and that includes working closely with councils to help them develop and deliver innovative ways to improve these services that are available to tenements and flats. To date, 14 councils have taken advantage of this support, with over £250,000 being channelled into service improvements across Scotland.
Marco Biaggi.
I thank the Cabinet Secretary for that answer. Clearly, tenement housing is difficult with the communal gathering of waste, and there are particular problems in my constituency. What further help does he envisage in the years to come, and are there particular examples he might single out of good practice in this area?
Cabinet Secretary.
There are indeed particular challenges facing local authorities with lots of tenements and flats, and I think we do recognise that. There has been a lot of work carried out with Zero Waste Scotland, working with local authorities, workshops, etc., to try and develop innovative ways in which waste can be collected from tenements and flats. And indeed, the help I refer to, the financial help, is still available should Edinburgh or any other authority want to take up that offer. There are also various surveys taking place with householders to help inform guidance that will then be developed to be made available to local authorities. So we do recognise there are many specific challenges facing different tenements and flats in Scotland. We're doing our very best to develop the expertise to make us improve the services.
Many thanks. And we now move to portfolio questions from Justice and Law Officers. Question 1 has not been lodged from Jim Eadie. An explanation has been provided. Question 2, Colin Keir.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government whether it plans to bring forward proposals regarding the regulation of taxis and private hires.
Secretary Kenny McCaskill.
Thank you. Yes, as we announced in the programme for Government 2013-14 in September 2013, we will introduce legislation shortly which will improve licensing in a range of areas to preserve public order and safety, reduce crime and advance public health. The planned bill will include provisions in relation to taxi and private hire car licensing.
Colin Keir.
I thank the Cabinet Secretary for his answer. Given the difficulties that local authorities in the past have had in defending policies of restricting numbers of taxis and PHCs, will the Scottish Government consider introducing guidelines or regulations which will help local authorities withstand legal challenge to these policies?
Cabinet Secretary.
Thank you. Well, again, I'm aware of the member's travails on this in his previous role as Council convener. In last year's public consultation, we specifically asked about convening a working group to provide updated, improved guidance and over-provision studies to support local authorities in conducting timely, cost-effective over-provision studies. In light of the responses to this proposal, we will be working with local authorities in developing best practice guidance so that they can share their experience in developing such policies. I am aware of the issue that Mr Keir raises. I'm aware of the difficulties that he experienced when he was dealing with these particular licences, and it is a matter that we've consulted upon and are intent on acting upon.
Thanks. Question 3, Annabel Ewing.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government what specialist Police Scotland facilities are based in Fife.
Cabinet Secretary.
Police Scotland's operational support division units for the dog section, firearms unit and divisional road policing unit are all based in Fife. Police Scotland's corporate headquarters and the Scottish Policing College are based at Tullyallen in Fife. There are a number of other specialist Police Scotland resources based in Fife, and I'll provide the member with a full list.
Annabel Ewing.
I thank the Cabinet Secretary for his answer, and I'm pleased indeed to hear of the range of specialist services based in Fife. I understand also this includes the domestic abuse and rape investigation units in Glenrothes, and I wonder if the Cabinet Secretary could clarify what performance monitoring systems are in place for these units, although I understand on the ground that they're working very well indeed.
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, obviously the good practice is being shared across Scotland. Fife had a good legacy and its legacy force, but we are seeking to share the benefits and address what is a significant problem in all areas of Scotland. I am aware that key performance indicators are in place, and these are monitored regularly at service and divisional level. Regular information is also reported to the Local Authorities Scrutiny Board, and in conjunction with local policing colleagues, officers within the Glenrothes Rape Investigation Unit and specialist officers dealing with domestic abuse make an important contribution to providing a supportive and consistent approach to victims while effectively pursuing offenders. I do believe that this is an area where Fife is benefiting from the establishment of a national unit. The expertise is used locally, but the benefit and advice that can be garnered centrally is ensured that every area of Scotland that is afflicted by these difficulties gets the best possible support.
Many thanks. Question 4, Mark Griffin.
To ask the Scottish Government whether Police Scotland has informed the Cabinet Secretary for Justice of the number of respondents to the consultation on public counter services.
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, the police in Scotland operate independently of ministers, and the provision of public counter services is an operational matter for Police Scotland and the Scottish Police Authority. I would advise the member to contact Police Scotland directly for the information he seeks. Police Scotland held a 4-week consultation on the proposals during the month of October 2013 and agreed to accept late submissions to the consultation after the closing date to ensure that all interested parties had an opportunity to contribute their views. I have been informed by Police Scotland on the changes to the provision of front counter services which are being made to ensure the most effective deployment of officers and resources.
Mark Griffin.
Thank the Cabinet Secretary for that answer. Kilsyth Police Station moved premises less than 3 years ago, and hours of operations were reduced from a 24 hours a day, 7-day service on the basis that there would be no further reduction. That promise was given to the community by senior police management. Does he think then that it's appropriate that less than 3 years on, the services to the Kilsyth community are being cut again?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, I think what we have to do is to ensure that the police and the public get the best possible police service that they're entitled to. That's why I was delighted that yesterday, yet again, this government has met its commitment to 1,000 additional officers. Those additional officers are being in our communities. These are operational matters. The police do have to balance the pressure on calls, both community bobbies, response calls, and indeed the need to man stations. I think that communities actually prefer to have interaction with the police, to have the police responding to calls when they're needed, interacting with the community rather than being stuck behind a counter. And indeed, even last night, I attended the Residents' Association at Meadowfield, Lady Nairn and the Paisleys, which we can see out of the back window, at least some aspects of the housing estate. The local police officer was there. I was delighted to meet the young Polish woman who joined Police Scotland. I think the community, and it was quite a significant turnout, were actually gratified that she was there rather than stuck behind a police counter.
Many thanks. Question 5, Mike Mackenzie.
To ask the Scottish Government what the latest figures are for crimes involving the handling of offensive weapons.
Cabinet Secretary.
Crime in Scotland is at a 39-year low, supported by the 1,000 extra officers. The latest recorded crime figures show that the number of offensive weapon crimes recorded by police in Scotland decreased by 29% between 2011-12 and 2012-13 to stand at 4,015. These crimes have decreased by 60% since this government came into power and are the lowest since 1986. In the member's own area, the number of offensive weapon crimes recorded by the police in Highlands and Islands have decreased by 35% between 2011-12 and 2012-13 to stand at 199. And we recognise the importance of this issue, and it's why the award-winning No Knives, Better Lives programme will be extended to all local authorities from April 2014.
Mike Mackenzie.
I thank the Cabinet Secretary for that answer and welcome the reduction in these crimes. Does the Cabinet Secretary agree that having specialist expertise to draw on for matters such as gun crime, that all parts of Scotland benefit from the resources of Police Scotland, especially the Highlands and Islands, which previously lacked such specialist services and resources and expertise?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, I do believe that. I think there has been significant benefits provided by moving to Police Scotland. I do know that the old legacy Northern Constabulary did have training facilities at Daviat. Equally, the benefit of the new Police Scotland service has ensured that there can be continuity, that the armed response units, for example, can ensure not just down A9 but on other corridors. There's a sharing of resources there and a pooling across the whole north, not simply in the old legacy Northern. Matters relating to guns are of significant in rural areas as they are equally in urban areas, and I think the provision of that benefit from the new single services there to all to see, as indeed we've also seen in the opening of the new Fort William Police and Ambulance Station, which again I think shows the benefits that reform can bring to ensure that we keep the local police officers in our communities, but we share and get the benefit of national resources, whether it's in firearms, whether it's on rape as Annabel, and domestic violence, as Annabel Ewing mentioned, or indeed on road traffic, which I think a lot of what the new Fort William Police Station will be addressing.
Many thanks. Question 6, Gill Patterson. It appears that Mr Patterson is not in the chamber, so we will be seeking both an apology and an explanation as to why not. Question 7, Alex Ferguson.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government what plans it has to reform the Rehabilitation of Offenders Act 1974.
Cabinet Secretary Kenny McCaskill.
The Scottish Government published a discussion paper on the 74 Act on the 27th of August 2013, and although the initial closing date for comments was 19th November, this date was extended to the end of January 2014 for late submissions to be received. A series of discussion workshops were also held with relevant organisations and individuals, including representatives of employers and ex-offenders. The analysis of the responses to the discussion paper and workshops is proceeding. The evidence gathered will inform our consideration of possible options to reform and improve the current legislation, taking account of the need to both support the rehabilitation of offenders, but also ensure continuing protection for the public, in particular for vulnerable groups.
Alex Ferguson.
I'm grateful to the Cabinet Secretary for his response. In my capacity as convener of the Cross-Party Group on Armed Forces Veterans, it's been brought to my attention that the changes announced by the UK Government that will reduce the period during which certain convictions need to be disclosed to potential employers could be of considerable benefit to the disproportionately high percentage of Armed Forces veterans who sadly fall foul of the law following discharge. Given that that disproportionate percentage is even more prevalent here in Scotland, can I ask the Cabinet Secretary whether he will bear that in mind and keep it to the forefront of his mind, indeed, when considering changes to the legislation here in Scotland?
Cabinet Secretary.
Oh, absolutely. I welcome both the point made by Mr Ferguson and the spirit in which he's made. We do recognise that England is ahead of us on this. Some of that is historic because the changes that they brought in actually started to commence when we went into a purdah period for the elections in 2011. The democratic process had a disruption and a delay there. This has given us the opportunity to see what is happening south of the border. I have to say I think we all recognise that there has to be change because the points made by Mr Ferguson are valid, especially for those who are veterans and those who serve in the armed forces, but that applies across society. We do have to make sure, though, that we do get that balance right, because we also have to make sure that we protect others, whether it's the young, the vulnerable or whatever. But I can give an assurance that we will be looking significantly at what's happening south of the border. We recognise that there has to be change, but we have to make sure that that change is balanced by the appropriate protection. But I'll be more than happy to continue these discussions, and if there are inputs that he wishes to make, or indeed those representing veterans' organisations, because getting them into employment is fundamental for their health and welfare and for our well-being as a society.
Many thanks. Question 8, Alison Johnson.
Thank you. To ask the Scottish Government what its position is on the implications for the justice system of the introduction of a requirement for local authorities to investigate allegations of harassment or unlawful eviction.
Secretary.
Well, it is a criminal offence under Section 22 of the Rent Scotland Act 1984 to unlawfully evict the residential occupier of any premises or to harass them with the intent of causing them to give up their occupation of the premises. Tenants who experience harassment or unlawful eviction can report this to the police, who have a general responsibility to investigate and detect crime. The Scottish Government has no current plans to introduce a requirement for local authorities to investigate allegations of harassment or unlawful eviction.
Alison Johnson.
Thank you. Figures from Citizens Advice Scotland show that they're dealing with 30 cases a week of illegal evictions or harassment by landlords in the private rented sector. That's up 20% on last year's figures. We're aware that the Homelessness Task Force made the point that only 15 people were prosecuted for unlawful evictions between 1995 and 1999. My question does suggest a possible solution that fits with Council's existing housing duties, but if the Minister is not supportive of that, what specific action will he take to bring the instances of these serious crimes down?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, I think the member does raise a fair point. These instances have been ongoing. I remember when I was in private practice, usually referring matters to Shelter Housing Aid Centre. I think the view we take as a government, and I'm more than happy to engage with the member, and indeed it may be that she should also be speaking to colleagues who are covering and dealing with the area specifically relating to housing. With regard to prosecutions, we have to ensure that prosecutions are brought to the attention both of the police and indeed to the Crown. And I would hope that Citizens Advice, as Shelter Housing Aid, to their credit in the past, would make sure that these matters are reported, because we do have laws. It is unacceptable, and we have to make sure that we protect, whether it's through criminal sanctions or indeed whether it's through civil actions in terms of interdict and other aspects that can be brought in. So I think our view as an administration, we currently have the laws. We have to make sure that they are properly enforced. We have to make sure that those who are charged with enforcing it know of it and that they are aware of their obligations and duties. And there certainly was a time in the past where police officers might not have understood that the Rent Act actually to harass a tenant was a criminal offence, but I think those days have changed. So I think what we need to do is to recognise that we have the legislation in place. What can we do to raise awareness, provide that information to tenants, to those advising tenants that this is unacceptable behaviour, and to make sure that those who have the authority, whether in the Crown and Prosecution Service or whether in the police, that they will act. But it's a matter that I'm more than happy to engage with the member, with Citizens Advice Scotland, as indeed I've no doubt my Cabinet colleague dealing with housing would also engage. It's unacceptable. Let's use the legislative framework. It is there and it should be used better.
Many thanks. Question 9, in the name of David Torrance, has not been lodged. An explanation has, however, been provided. Question 10, Liam MacArthur.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. Apologies for my slightly late arrival for Justice questions, but to ask the Scottish Government what impact the proposed abolition of honorary sheriffs will have on access to justice in rural and island areas.
Mr. Rosanna Cunningham.
I do recognise the contribution that honorary sheriffs make to the justice system in rural and island areas, particularly in view of the fact that the position is unpaid. However, the proposed reforms to the justice system, including the creation of new summary sheriffs and increased use of technology alongside sheriffs, will reduce the need for honorary sheriffs and improve access to justice. I can, however, assure the member that the position of honorary sheriff will only be abolished once alternative arrangements have been made.
Liam MacArthur.
I thank the Minister for that answer. However, the proposal in the Court Reform Bill does appear to lack a thoroughness, and I am told has not been subject to proper consultation with many of those most directly affected. In island areas like those I represent, the abolition of honorary sheriffs could create serious difficulties. For example, where police require warrants to be signed, is it the intention for sheriffs to be on call 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, or are scanned warrants to be admissible, in which case can the Minister advise what the cost of the technology required to deliver this will be and in what time frame? And if the Minister's concern relates to the security of tenure and independence, is this not an argument for amending the appointment system? And will she not concede that even if this change is to be phased in, chances are that the appointment of further honorary sheriffs will simply cease meantime, creating practical difficulties in many rural parts of the country, including Orkney?
Minister.
That was a long question of many parts, Presiding Officer. I did say at the end of my initial comments that honorary sheriffs will not cease to be in place until we have ensured that alternative processes are in place. Now, the member asked quite a lot of different parts to his question, and I will ensure that each of them is dealt with separately. However, he is wrong to say that there weren't responses in terms of the consultees to the bill. There were, and this issue was raised in responses in the consultation. He asked a specific question about warrants. I can assure him that emergency applications will be dealt with by sheriffs or summary sheriffs, and the increased use of technology with that. It's anticipated that in the future a custody court and the issue of warrants and interim orders could be carried out by video link and by electronic authentication. These are the kinds of things that we want to introduce to ensure that new practices are brought in. We use new technology now over a wide range of different professions and businesses, and there is no reason why that can't be introduced equally as well in the court system. And I simply want to reiterate what I've already stated, is that until we are sure that there will not be difficulties, the honorary sheriffs will not disappear.
Many thanks. And that concludes portfolio questions. And we now move to the next item of business, which is a debate on motion number 9222 in the name of Alec Neil on an update on delivering the 2020 vision in